have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Nathan Hamay, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
All right, welcome back to another night of the internationally syndicated show, Dr. J Radio Live, where we are broadcasting on our very own coast-to-coast PM radio network. That's right. We took the name C2C and threw a PM at it. Why? Because we can. This is also played on PSN Radio on the East Coast and internationally. Don't forget, late night in the Midlands, where it is broadcast not just through their channel, and it is also taken through their terrestrial stations. And one more group, or should I say group of people and station I'd like to thank for also taking our program is, of course, Deep Program Radio, which is based in the United Kingdom. And thanks to our co-host who is live in London, who I'll introduce in just a second, set this up and continually to feed them. Now, these shows, as you know, we're participating in the live one right now. When you hear them on the other networks, they are not live. So they are, some will be, but obviously, for the most part, these shows are repeated over and over. So just keep that in mind. If anybody you seeing this or watching this in our archives on YouTube, if you want to participate, all you have to do is look at the screen, look at the website, just go and join in during that time. You can use Skype, you could use phone, you could even, use the chat room once we get Dan the man out there who's listening to monitor. So, with that being said, it's a little past 7 o'clock right here where I am in the City of Angels, or some may say not so angelic anymore, but we'll talk about that with our amazing guest, who happens to be a man of the cloth, a pastor and professor, author, and so much more. Very, very down-to-earth guy. And if you don't know who he is, I will give you a brief moment to check all social media accounts from Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Facebook, our website, and much more. I think Google+. And then we have Johnny Webb. First of all, those in the East Coast, I wanted to acknowledge Tom, who's also helping us doing sound engineering and video production for you guys out there watching this right now, with the cool slides that he's also put together for each individual show and some footage from Jaime Maussan. It's 10 p.m., 10:02, going on 10:03 Eastern time. And we're Johnny Webb, live in London, staying awake for this show, not just working on it, but afterwards and before it. A lot of work goes to make these shows happen behind the scenes. Johnny, how you doing this morning?
Pretty good there, Dr. J, and good morning to you there, Ted. Looking forward to tonight's show, and I think there's going to be some fascinating stuff coming up, as always.
Well, you let the cat out of the bag already, so you gave the first half, so I'm going to give the second half. Let's give his full title. That happens to be the one, the only, Pastor Ted Phillips. Ted, my friend, welcome back.
Well, Dr. J, it's good to be back with you again, and alive. I was kind of worried about that, but it's nice to be alive.
Well, exactly. And we have to thank the Lord and thank everybody out there who's, may have helped, and not to mention prayer. Because depending on where you put it, either religious people or New Age, quasi-religion, or even atheistic people have come to some term, even modern-day Satanism, have come to this realization that the universe manifests. Now, those of, faiths will call it God. But everybody agrees that not only will the universe manifest things, on top of that, they did a study called on the Maharishi effect in Washington, D.C. And what they did is, over a period of 7 days, they took people and had to meditate on peace and crime reduction for the city, the urban city of Washington, D.C. So they did this for an hour a day, 7 days. In that 1 week, what they found was that meditation or prayer units, if you want to put a number to them, go up exponentially. So 1,000 people may be equivalent to, say, 100 million, or maybe even more. The point is, you know, if one person does it, 1 unit goes out. 2 people, maybe it's 5. The point, and so what they got, the result was, this is 70% crime reduction only in the week they did this. So essentially, everybody out there listening agrees to this in one way or another. Of course, there are still some other hardcore people. But let's give some background on yourself first. I know you're a professor in theology for graduate students. You are a pastor, and you are an author of an amazing book by God's Chariots, not to mention a whole slew of amazing articles you've written. So let's go back to, when did you start, deciding to be a man of the cloth, and then teaching in seminaries?
Well, Dr. J, I am a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and I've got this curious mind that just seems to know no limits. And one of the nice things about thinking about God and the cosmos is that that's pretty limitless in terms of subject matter. So I like to think about the Big Bang and everything that happened in between, and what's going to happen in the future of the cosmos, and how the divine presence and God's goals are at work in the natural world. So I have a lot of fun in Berkeley. It's kind of like hog heaven for a person such as me. I teach at the Graduate Theological Union, which has a number of seminaries, which we train men and women for the ministry, but we also train doctoral students to teach in universities and colleges, and we can mix up our own denominations with other Christian groups. We have institutes for Buddhist studies and Islamic studies and Dharma studies and Jewish studies. And then the University of California, which we're connected to, we've got more scientists there than Orange County has oranges.
Mm-hmm.
And
should I say also that that's one of my alma maters?
Oh, it is. Well, then you know what an exciting crossroads Berkeley can be. So I put my fingers in as many pies as I possibly can.
Now, I actually had something I was going to ask, but before we do that, you mentioned something really important. You brought up, of course, God, the universe, and the Big Bang. So let's start actually with that question before we get into religion and extraterrestrials, as well as your book. Now, a lot of people try to paint, or have thought that the Big Bang is provable up to 99.9% that it happened 13.4 billion years ago. But then you have a lot of new theories that have been fitting in place, but again, they're theories until they become fact. One of them is singularity, in that there are multiple dimensions, multiple universes, and they're infinite. And therefore, that wasn't the first Big Bang. That may have been the Big Bang for our universe, but that they have been going on forever, and they will continue to go on forever. And according to this hypothesis, we've probably experienced a few Big Bangs since we've been doing the show already in the last few minutes. What do you think about that?
I have a lot of thoughts about that particular topic. If you look only at the empirical evidence and the mathematical formulas that go with it, what it points to is a singularity in the sense that there would be a moment, t = 0 or time = 0, in which everything we know in the universe was only one thing. I just imagine it as a little BB or a hand grenade that suddenly goes bang and everything explodes and spreads out, and here we are on planet Earth, and we're just a piece of shrapnel flying away from the original explosion, and we'll keep flying away until we run out of energy and just kind of wind down. That's the way I imagine the Big Bang. But it's important to note that nobody was there to take a video of it. And so it's a conclusion drawn from evidence by going backwards, measuring the trajectories of things that are currently going outwards. So it's really a good theory. Finally, everybody believed it in 1965, and since then, a lot of physicists have confirmed it with background radiation and things like that. And so the current estimate is the Big Bang took place 13.82 billion years ago. Well, that creates a problem. And the reason is the Big Bang looks like what the theologians have been saying all along. Of course, reality has got a history, it's got a beginning, it's going to have an end, and it's God's story. Well, if you're an atheist, you don't like the Big Bang to look so theological.
That's right.
And so a number of scientists have tried to come up with alternatives to the Big Bang. The first one was Fred Hoyle, whom you may remember. He was both a science fiction writer as well as a physicist, and he came up with what he called the steady state theory. Well, he lost. I mean, the Big Bang just simply won, and so Fred couldn't sustain his atheistic position. The newest candidate is the multiverse theory.
Thank you for bringing
which is the one that you were alluding to, and that developed in the late 70s and early 80s over the anthropic principle. Maybe you've discussed this on the show, and that is when we take a look at the initial conditions for that Big Bang, it was just right for the making of planets and the arrival of life and that kind of thing. And if the initial conditions would have been different by the tiniest of fractions, you and I would not be here because the universe would not have been hospitable for the evolution of life on Earth. Well, that only made matters worse if you're an atheist, because that looks like God designed the universe.
That there is a superior being of
Right.
something that made it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one of my favorite physical cosmologists is a guy named Martin Rees at Cambridge in Great Britain, and he's a very respected scientist, and I've had a chance to talk with him. And he, like Stephen Hawking, support the multiple universe theory. And and here's his logic. Are you ready?
Yes.
The logic goes like this: when we look at the startling evidence that the universe that we're living in had to be designed at the beginning, he says, well, let's try to explain it. Well, here's one alternative: happenstance, chance. Well, that's not very good. Well, the second alternative is God designed it that way. Well, that's religious. We don't want to do religion. So third, well, let's come up with the multiverse, that this universe is not the only one. There are many of them. And what Dr. Rees and other theorists such as Stephen Hawking slip in there is the doctrine of determinism. That is to say, they don't really want an indeterminist universe. They want a deterministic universe. So they imagine then that at every juncture where a contingency could happen, the universe could go to the left or to the right. It does both. And when it does both, it creates another universe. Well, you can imagine over time, you get a lot of universes. So that's where the idea comes, Dr. J, that I'm only talking to one Dr. J. In another universe, there's another Dr. J who made a slightly different decision. And in a third universe, there's another Dr. J who made two slightly different decisions, etc. So the question is there any empirical evidence whatsoever for the multiverse? Let me just say, I don't think there's any. It's zero.
Speculation,
it's a matter
right?
of faith.
Yeah. One other thing that, and I'm going to relate this in before I jump into some questions, especially one that's been sitting here from a listener, is it goes along the same two things that you mentioned. I'm glad you brought up multidimensions because that was one of the three branching off the Big Bang. The third would be the string theory. Now, all my life, and even people in the 60s talking about groovy, the vibes, and all this, I believed, in the vibes or the way people are emanating something from them. But it wasn't until some mainstream scientists introduced to me some very easy readings on this subject, as well as documentaries. And I finally learned to understand what they were trying to say. That when you go to the subatomic, subnuclear level of atoms, what you find are strings. Now, the strings can be pulled to be one long piece. Just imagine a rubber band and cut it in half. And then you could squeeze it or take the two ends and push it. What are you going to have? You have a little squiggly line. Or take it all together and wrap it around so the two ends meet to each other. The point is that each of these strings vibrates and emanates a vibration. And so when you come down to it, really everything is just a small piece of string. And I just thought that was really fantastic. And so I figured, since we talked about, the Big Bang, singularity, and of course multiple universes, what would you have to say about that notion, or again, a theory that is really hard to prove, if that?
Well, I love the imaginations of our physicists and our cosmologists because they just come up with such marvelous ideas. I understand through gossip, if gossip counts, that Murray Gell-Mann, who had devised string theory some years ago, is beginning to back away from it, thinking that it's going to be difficult to confirm. Nevertheless, I think that what goes on in the atom, in subatomic particles, is really important, and it relates a little bit to what we were saying earlier. Why would anybody want to posit a multiverse theory? And it's because, in large part, because they're determinists. And I favor the indeterminist interpretation of what electrons do within the atom, and that's basically the school, we call it the Copenhagen School, or Niels Bohr. You've probably discussed that on and off. And here's two reasons why I think the indeterminist theory of subatomic activity is important. The first one is that it really means that the natural world is historical in character. It's contingent. It could have gone this way, it could have gone that way, and even if there were no human beings around, nature would still have a history. It would still be doing different things. It would be creating new things, and on and on. And I think that's what scientists actually observe about the natural world, and that's true both in the physical world as well as the biological world. The second thing, reason why I think it's important, and this you won't find in the literature, it's kind of something we whisper about in Berkeley, and that is that indeterminism within the atom is necessary for you and me to have freedom at the human level. Now, indeterminism doesn't explain everything about freedom, but if you and I make deliberations and decisions and take actions, if you pick up a hammer and whack a nail, you have just changed the universe because you took that action. Now, it is necessary, I think, that there be indeterminism within the atom for you to be able to pick up a hammer and whack a nail because things weren't all determined to begin with. Now, human freedom is a great deal more than indeterminism, to be sure, but I think it's necessary. So what I'm hoping in the next half decade or so is that this whole thing about subatomic activity will get discussed more and more, and we'll try to show that atoms are in your brain, in my brain,
Yes.
and there's indeterminism in the brain, and that is what makes possible human freedom. Doesn't explain it, but makes possible. So those are reasons why I like the Copenhagen interpretation in there. And I don't know if you've discussed this with other people on your show or not, but I just love the way physicists get in there and tell us about what's going on in this smallest dimension of reality.
Now, let me actually get to something first, because I see a couple questions that have already come through, not to mention something important I want to say. You have been a pastor for a long time, and you've had an open-minded curiosity that is not seen by almost everybody. And let me say also, you've written a fantastic book, which I have, and not to mention on top of all the other readings you have available for people to see, a lot of them online for free. But the book in question that I read, which I thought was outstanding, was God's Chariots. And I want to remind everybody, you can get that. Just go to our books and video tab on our website, drjradiolive.com, find Ted Peters, and click on his name to see where you find that book and anything else he's written. So, before I ask you about this book, since Lucinda S. here in Clayton, Missouri, has been asking this question, I'm going to go to that first. She wants to know if your foray into ufology has met with resistance within your denomination and your academic community.
That's a good question. I have not run into any difficulties within my denomination, which is the Lutherans, but I certainly have in the academic world, because people who think of themselves as well-educated in the natural sciences like to stay away from things that they think might be pseudoscience. And UFOs get put into that category right along with astrology and faith healing and all kinds of things like that. So, yeah, I've been at a cocktail reception with some academics, and somebody will say, oh, well, Dr. Peters, he wrote a book on UFOs, and somebody will say, oh, I see somebody on the other side of the room I want to go talk to. So I do get a little bit of that, but I'm a kind of a courageous guy. I just sort of push on because I think it's interesting. And I have to tell the young lady who asked the question, even some of my closest academic colleagues want to keep their distance because I'm interested in UFOs.
You know, I'm going to jump the gun right here, and let's go to something very important that a lot of people are not talking or are trying to get us to. And this, of course, happens to be disclosure. So let's go across to the pond and ask Johnny, what do you have?
Do you need disclosure in the United Kingdom, Johnny?
We need it globally.
Well, we have it here already. You know, people acknowledge that the Queen's a reptile.
She looks too sweet to be a reptilian.
It's the 2 baby a day habit that worries me on the blood side. But no, you know, going back to the questions you talked about, you know, in the next 5 years or the next half a decade, what you'd like to see. But one of the questions came in: do you not feel that in the next 5 years we should have disclosure by then? And it carried on and said, it's a narrow path, and it's a narrow and thin path you're walking. And that comes from Joshua in London.
In the United States, there are a couple of puzzles about disclosure. When Jimmy Carter ran for the presidency in 1976, and remember, Jimmy himself was a witness to an unidentified flying object, he promised that when he would become president, that he would disclose. He would find out what the government has, and he would make it public, and all of that kind of thing. Well, he became president, and you know what? Nothing happened. When he got bugged about it, he turned to Frank Press at that time, who was the head of NASA, who came out and said, the U.S. government has got no information of visitations from outer space unless somebody can give us a piece of hard evidence, a material that is unknown on Earth. We don't have any reason to believe in it. And all the people who were had been asking for disclosure really felt disappointed. So we've got a presidential election going on now, and I don't know if either of the two candidates are willing to commit themselves to disclosure, but it would strike me that that's the only way to do it. Over the years, at least in the United States, from time to time, documents have been released, and usually the quality is about the same as J. Allen Hynek was able to release from Project Blue Book and was in the Condon Report in 1969, etc. And nothing startling has appeared. Well, you could further say, well, that's because they're not giving us the good stuff. They're not giving us the documents that tell us about interaction between Washington and an intelligent civilization, or technology transfer from outer space to Earth, etc. So I don't know if your experience, Johnny, in the UK is parallel or not. I suspect that it is. And so even if a president were to say, I'm going to disclose everything, I'm not sure after the disclosure took place if we would be satisfied or if we would have confidence that there wasn't still some really good stuff that we weren't told. So it's kind of like a greased pig. It's sort of hard to get your arms around it. What do you think, Johnny, about disclosure, especially from your situation?
Well, in London, we're run, unfortunately, by tabloid news. And so whatever's written in the paper, generally people believe. They dismiss people that talk about UFOs, even if you're a pilot, like, or in some profession and you start to talk it. Like you said, you get people that say, excuse me, I've got someone over here I want to talk to. As a rule, that's generally been the case. But in the last 10 years, I must say it's changed a lot. People are more open-minded. They're more susceptible to new information. They don't dismiss it like they used to. I still think in the upper echelons of people, they want to dismiss it very quickly. They don't want to acknowledge that there are possibly, other life forces or life beings working and living among us, and possibly in the higher workings of society, in government, in parliament, probably in the royals. So, today people are more open-minded about it. They wouldn't just dismiss it. And so, you've got the Vatican that came out a few years ago and they spoke openly about it. The guy that runs the observation center there, he was I can't remember his name, Signor, whatever. I'm sorry about the name, I forgot it. But, if the Vatican is now telling us about it, we do have, Mrs. Clinton, who should be in jail, but she says that if she becomes president, she'll investigate, Area 51. I think it's in the public domain. People are taking it seriously now, and they're certainly using it to get votes. But I think in the next 5 years, we should have something very similar to disclosure. I'll give it back to you, Dr. J. But
just a quick footnote.
Sure.
The guy you were trying to think about, his name is Guy Consolmagno. He's a Jesuit brother, and he directs the Vatican Observatory. It's basically a scientific organization, but he himself is willing to entertain the theological implications of extraterrestrial life. He replaced another Jesuit named Jose Funes. And Jose, since leaving the Vatican Observatory, is now giving himself to researching and writing on the theological implications of extraterrestrial life. So there is a nice ferment going on there in the Vatican these days, but that wouldn't have anything to do with the British government or the U.S. government on disclosure. At least as far as I know, it wouldn't have any connection.
Let me say one thing about disclosure. Okay, as we know, anybody who talked about it 50, 60 years ago was a quack. But if you talked about it 100 years ago, people thought people were living on the moon. If you talked about it 500 years ago, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, then you were acknowledging the angels from heaven, if you're a Christian or a Jew, or you're acknowledging the sky people, as the Native Americans and other cultures would put it. However, here in the United States, we have more ridicule than other neighboring countries. A good friend of mine and ours on the show, but also a very good friend personally, is Jaime Maussan. We speak very often. He provides a lot of amazing footage. Every time he's in town, he comes and visits my family restaurant and says a few good words to the Spanish-speaking community. And we also have a good friend, very good friend, who's in his diamond years. I just celebrated celebrating his 93rd birthday. Former Defense Minister of Canada, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, where in their countries, respectively, it's nowhere near as it is here. And take it one step further, in Mexico, he said they believe it. Part of it has to do with their spirituality and them always having open-minded, and also the fact that their intelligence communities don't compare to the United States, and the propaganda machine is not working as hard over there, if not to mention that the United States has been involved in taking some of the craft that crashed on their side of the border, allegedly. Now, anybody who has been born way past our generation, the new generation, who is now 19 years or older, was born after Goldilocks, the first Goldilocks planets was found, and I know we're well into the three figures. And anybody who was 23 after that is probably in graduate school, just finishing their bachelor's, and they were, in preschools, which means that when they entered kindergarten and first grade and they first were introduced to our solar system, they were not just told about our solar system, they'd have to be told about what the Kepler found. So that has changed things dramatically, and when you look at the young audience, I have not met anybody who says I don't believe it. Now, sure, a large chunk of the younger crowd believes that we have been visited. Even larger chunk, the majority of them, almost every one of them, says life exists elsewhere. I've never met any person 25 or younger who says I don't believe in life outside of this universe. However, there is that portion that believes that we have not been visited, but that is much smaller than those that believe they have been visited. And when you compare that age bracket to mine, or even yours, Ted, and Johnny's, and Tom's, all of ours, it seems a lot smaller with, people who are of your age. So that's why I'm so thankful when I speak to someone of your intellect, someone your faith, and having such an open mind and grasp on this. So, two things. People think disclosure is going to come by our president. First of all, why would that ever happen? Think about that. If we have killed, not we, when I say we, I'm talking about the MJ-12, whatever you want to put it, the people in charge, maybe the U.S. government, private military corporations that deal with this, are the men in black that silence people, such as Secretary of Defense James Forrestal in the early 50s, who was thrown out of the building. A lot of people say it was a suicide. That was the official. But the point is they would have to admit, oh, just so you know, we've had craft in our possession for at least since at least 1947. Actually, even further than that. Let's go to 1942 or 1896 or 7, whatever it was, Aurora, Texas. We have bodies, living and dead, and we're in communication with them. We have technologies you guys don't know about. We're sorry for you family members of those we've killed and lied about, but we had to do it to hold the secret. Just thought you should know. It's never going to happen, folks. I don't understand why our society deems a police officer, when a reporter talks to a police officer, it's taken as fact, or a politician is taken as fact, but you're speaking to a scientist, then they question things. And then the other thing is, I think the only way disclosure is ever going to happen is doing what we're doing right now, sharing information. Information is really power to everybody, and I think it's going to take I think this personally, and also Jim Sparks, a very famous abductee, because he remembers, he doesn't go under hypnosis, he has conscious recall, which is very rare, says that once more than half, the majority of the planet believes that we are being visited. Not that we were visited in ancient history or something like that. It means that we're nonstop, regularly visited every day. When that feeling is emanated to them, and people are not, gangsters not going to grab their guns and start shooting at craft, they will make themselves known much more openly, because they're not supposed to, this is, again, going back to what people have been told, that they're not supposed to interfere with our evolution. So that is my 2 cents on disclosure. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, Dr. J, I really like the way you have set things up. It's really quite complicated. You brought up a lot of issues. I'd like to just speak briefly to 3 of them. One of them, you got me thinking about time. This idea that there are people living on the moon and the sun. Interestingly, that was discussed for centuries. Even Kepler, the astronomer, thought that. And Nicholas of Cusa, who was a Roman Catholic bishop 100 years before Kepler, thought that. And the phrase astrotheology, which was coined by a British clergyman named Durham, thought that. And of course, we needed telescopes to discover that, no, you can't live on the moon and you can't live on the sun. But people were not shy at all about speculating about such things. And so it is interesting that you point out that it's a no-no today, but it certainly wasn't before. So what happened? So now I'm going to go into my second point. The contemporary UFO phenomenon, I think, begins in June of 1947. Not that things didn't happen before, but the way we think about it becomes consolidated in the late 40s and early 50s. And there were a few disparaging remarks made before 1952, but if you may remember, not that you were there, you may have read how in July of 1952 there were 10 days in which flying saucers buzzed Washington every night after night. Radar trackings, jets were, mustered to chase them. And so President Truman... And
not to mention the great photograph, right? That was on whatever newspaper, Washington Post maybe?
Oh, yeah. It made Life magazine, it made the newspapers. And so the whole nation was now aware of flying saucers. And debunking became very systematic from 1953 on. And that was an American thing. And I think when you say, well, what about young people born in the 90s or later, in an era where we've got exoplanets and we've got SETI and NASA actively looking for life off Earth, it's a different period. And I suspect that might have something to do with why it's a little embarrassing for me to be interested in this topic when I'm hanging around with my older colleagues, but definitely not my younger colleagues. Then I want to say something that you could ask your friend. Is he from Mexico?
Jaime Maussan, yeah.
Yeah. And what I noticed, and I studied UFO reports, 50 years worth of reports, and I noticed there's a big difference between an English language UFO report and a Spanish language report. And those people who speak English tend to be more mechanical and technological and prosaic and tame and even boring sometimes, whereas Spanish and Portuguese language reports tend to be dramatic and exciting and all kinds of things. And I had a chance on one occasion to go to a UFO conference in Mexico, in which we really had people from many different countries, and there just seemed to be a cultural difference, and I don't know if that actually changes the data, but certainly a cultural difference. Brazil, I think, for a while, and the government had an official UFO investigation division. You know, you're not going to find that in the American setting. So it would be sort of interesting for you to quiz your Mexican friend about that and see if he thinks there might be, at least in part, a cultural influence. And then the question would be, if you were to take the same case reported by an English speaker and a Spanish speaker, I wonder if it would look different, or if they... Anyway, those are just questions I have. I don't really even have a hypothesis to explain it.
I definitely agree, and I will definitely email him that, or ask him when I see him in person next. You know, I think it's an important thing, and here's another really interesting thought that's been going around is, are we all being engaged by the same extraterrestrial race? That is whoever's visiting the U.S. and possibly made pacts and treaties with Eisenhower in the early 50s may be different than what the Soviets or current day Russia, Vladimir Putin, is who's working with, or some people even said that Adolf Hitler was influenced not just by them, but by occultism. That's why there's a lot of claims that Aleister Crowley was actually a double agent, and there was alleged crash in Black Forest, Germany, in 1936, I believe, 36, which would have given him ample time. So not too long ago, Linda Moulton Howe was on the show and said that World War II was actually a proxy war fought by those who want to be in control of this planet. So that leads to the bigger question: who controls this planet? And I wanted to ask your opinion on, is it fallen angels? Is it the neutral angels? Or are we still being protected by God and good angels?
Well, I think the way you opened that, is there really a single extraterrestrial race or group who is responsible for the wide variety of apparent contacts? It would just seem to me, without knowing too much data, that more than likely it's going to be a variety. It's hard to think that there would be just one single race. On the other hand, you know, until we ask them, we're probably not going to know. For a period of time in the 70s and 80s, there was a guy named Barker and some others who were trying to collect descriptions of aliens in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they had 30 or 40 different types, and so they weren't all the same. So even if only a small percentage would be verifiable, you still had quite a variety. So my inclination is to think that we're not dealing with one or only one race or civilization, but that is at best a guess on my part. When it comes to controlling the planet, I tend to think that history is pretty much the way we observe it. I used to, you had mentioned earlier what happened in your family in Greece during the Second World War.
Yes.
I used to spend a lot of time studying World War II, especially the European theater, and I kept trying to imagine if the Russians would not have won at Stalingrad, or if the Allies would not have won at El Alamein in Africa, and then D-Day would not have happened. How would the course of history gone differently, etc. And I've also traced very carefully Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project that came up with the atomic bombs, etc. I just think those are the contingencies of history. I don't think anybody's in control. And I think one of the feelings that the whole world had during the war, and it lingered after the war, is nobody's in control. And we're going to kill ourselves, through nuclear war. And I think that at least in part, this global anxiety contributed to hopes that people placed on UFO sightings. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that they're coming from a more advanced civilization in space? Is it possible that they had their nuclear period and they found a way not to destroy themselves? Is it possible that they'll show us on Earth how to prevent a nuclear war and self-destruction? So I think that feeling of being out of control and hoping that a superior race from an extraterrestrial civilization could either take control or help us to, get a grip, so to speak. I think those are all factors. But I could not, if I had the hypothesis, to go back and say, these are events that extraterrestrials engineered to go one way or another. And even if there were demons, I would have to say the demons were not very well organized either, because, they could do a few bad things here and there, but they were unable to stop D-Day, or they were unable to, stop the Allies from defeating the Axis powers and things like that. Anyway, my bottom line is I think either the ET theory or the demon theory probably doesn't add much that we couldn't get from the kind of history our good historians go after.
Speaking of the Bible, I'm going to go to across the pond to check with Johnny. What you got, Johnny?
We've got Lisa Kasner on Facebook, and she has a question. It says, my question is a biblical question.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, good evening, Lisa. A question is, my question is a Bible question. Is this how everything is wired? What's that one? Ephesians 6:12 in the King James Version. It says, for we wrestle against flesh and blood, and not against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
So is Lisa's question how to interpret that?
I suppose it is, yeah.
I get the feeling when we take a look at Adolf Hitler and his inner circle, and by the way, I studied that for a while. I wrote a book called Sin, and in there I looked at speeches and meditations and things by Heinrich Himmler and some of the Hitler people, and because I was asking the kind of question that Lisa is asking there. And what I thought I saw with Hitler himself and also his immediate followers is these people were drunk on power.
Yeah, yes.
They could not get enough power, and they thought, wrongly of course, they thought that Adolf Hitler was, the center of power for the planet. And they loved being so close to Hitler because then Hitler's power would go right through them and then emanate out. I would use the word demonic to talk about. I use the word demonic, by the way, if you hear the call to shed innocent blood, then that's the voice of Satan. And that's one of the things that was so prevalent during the Nazi period. I mean, the murders, just not even in battle and war, just sheer murders of people on scales absolutely unheard of, the shedding of innocent blood. Well, I could just imagine Satan and his minions just cheering to see the horror and the devastation that was wrought by that group of people. And has it happened since the Second World War? Well, yes, it has here and there around the world, and I'm particularly concerned about genocide.
Yes,
what happened in Rwanda?
Really glad you mentioned that. How could someone sit back and allow this to happen? 50 million people dead from World War II, 10 million people dead alone from the mass genocide in these chambers. Now, it's ironic you brought that up because just a few hours ago, an ad came up on a website I was looking at. It says, see the 12 evil people's children pictures before they rose to what they became. So of course there is the famous picture of baby Hitler. Then there's picture of Bin Laden as a young boy, and John Wayne Gacy and all these other people, Saddam Hussein. I was shocked to see the number one was al-Bashar, the current president of Syria. And it went on to give a little bio that I didn't quite know. That he wasn't meant to be, in politics. It was his brother. He was going for a career in London, and his brother tragically died in a car accident, so he had to step up and, go take the political dynasty into his hands. And this is news to me until a few hours ago, recent satellite photos and intelligence show that he actually has extermination facilities. Sort of, they equated them to what Hitler used, where he kills up to 1,000 people at a time, and that's genocide. And what are we doing right now? And what's everybody who's observing us doing? If you observe the planet for the last, since the beginning of civilization, we are very, very horrible species in overall as far as violence. I mean, the first skeletons that were found in this planet were found with spears in them.
Yes, I'm very concerned about just what you brought up, and it appears as though no matter how far you go back in the evolution of the human race, it appears that violence was always a part of our way of life, and what we experience today is complex. There are layers and layers and layers of ideology and things laid over it. And the worst cases of violence, I think we probably agree, would be genocide, where it's gratuitous murder of innocent people, and the justifications are always so paper thin and repulsive for it. I just didn't know that about the Syrian situation.
Neither did I until today. Blew
Wow.
my mind.
Yeah. That is really grotesque. If it turns out to be the case the way you describe it, yuck. You ruined my day, Dr. J.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize for that. But it's a scary thought, you know? I just don't understand how people can torture other human beings and get pleasure from it. Even as recently, this is going on right across our border in the south. In Mexico, I was watching this documentary, Cartel Land, and they literally put men with bulletproof helmets and vests with GoPro cameras to be a part of a vigilante group that was trying to chase out the cartels in Michoacan, which is, I think, southern Mexico. And what you see is so disgusting. I mean, just typical of what you see in normal films, bodies mutilated that are hanging in the streets of Juarez, or heads cut off, and I don't get it. How can they, I mean, these stories that I've heard from some of these survivors, how can they be so, so murderous and at the same time laugh about it and have no remorse? To me, they have to be missing that part of their heart, of their conscience, or that part of their brain that makes them feel empathy like a normal human being does, like us or our listeners. With that being said, this might be a good time to bring in 951. I believe it's Dan Hoquist. Dan the man.
Thank you, Dr. J. I hear you're doing very well tonight.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear your voice is much better.
I was definitely not feeling well for a good 10 days or so, but I'm up on the up and up. I appreciate it.
Well, Mr. Peters, you're such an interesting person. We have very similar minds, but
Good,
let me bring to you, or at least bring to the table, the indigenous culture, because I'm part Cherokee, but I'm also blood brother to the Blackfoot people, and I did go through some of the old ways training. And I see physics from a completely different standing, and I'm also a nerd. So this is,
well, that's something to be proud of, I think.
Well, it's been a long way to get home, back home to the spiritual side of actual reality, which is now called physics, I guess. But as far as genocide goes, we originally didn't think, white people were human, and our name for ourselves in almost every tribal language is the people. So when these other people came over who had no feeling for the joy of the surroundings or the people who were here, it threw us back. We didn't know how to take you, and we actually had several huge conferences back then to determine whether you guys were human or not. But but that being said, I wanted to get back to some physics though.
Sure. Go ahead and ask a question, Dan, then I'm going to ask you to hold over until we come back from break. Don't hang up.
Sure.
But by all means, ask your first question, then we'll take a quick break, Ted.
Well,
okay.
I'm wondering if you've heard about the redshift controversy.
I know what redshift means, but I don't know anything about a controversy. So lay it on me.
Okay. Well, we might have to go to break first. It's a little involved. It actually gets into plasma physics.
Yes,
and
I say we should do break, and then we definitely will hear your explanation on it, Dan, and have. And that's ironic too. We actually had a written question that I never got a chance to write about, which is
I think that was my question.
That could very well could have. So everybody, hang tight. Ted, hang tight.
All right.
Feel free. You got 3 minutes to do what you need to do. Everybody will be right back and enjoy the commercials as we have them set up for you. And in literally 3 short minutes, you can join the show and continue to listen with Ted Peters right here on Dr. J Radio Live.
Back in 3.
This is George Tsoukalos, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
These creatures are very, very strange. They're anomalous.
It is the age of revelations. Bizarre creatures. The false perception of reality exposed.
Just go to the Dr. J's, website. You'll see it on the left-hand side. It's like right there. Click the link. Guys, what can I tell you? I mean, it's $40, but you get a DVD and a book plus three bonuses. Communion CD, a year subscription to our Politics, Prophecy, and Supernatural magazine, which comes in your email box. Watchers 3, which is $20 for that DVD. Fingerprints of the Supernatural. We promise you will not be disappointed. And Dr. J gets a cut of the proceeds. So everybody's happy. You support him, you support us, and it's all good. And you get to educate yourself on what's going on, because we've just scratched the surface here. Trust me.
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Torpedo impact now, 40 seconds. Torpedo impact, 25 seconds.
Everybody,
all ahead flank. All ahead flank.
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Humble host, Dr. J, broadcasting in Los Angeles. Some call it the City of Angels, as others call it Not So Angelic City, where it is now officially a little past 8 p.m. Pacific time. Technically, it's 8:03 p.m. Pacific time. And let's not forget, we are broadcasting literally around the world. 4 different networks, terrestrial radio, and of course, not to mention our very own Coast to Coast PM radio network on the East Coast, where it is now past 11 p.m. Eastern time. And we're Johnny Webb in London, 4:04 a.m. Thank you, Johnny Webb, for staying awake. Now, right before we went to break, of course, we've been speaking to a very fabulous and fantastic guest on an incredible show, and that happens to be Professor and Pastor Ted Peters, not to mention author of the book God's Chariots, and a slew of other reading materials that you can see online, not to mention free articles he has written. Before we bring back our caller to ask, and former guest to ask the question to Ted. Ted, I want to turn it to you let's talk about where people, talk about your book, where people can buy it, other things, and let me mention to everybody, in case they missed this in the beginning of the show, don't forget to go to drjradiolive.com. Remember, the same name for everything. Click on the Books and Videos tab, find Ted Peters, and from there you will see where you can find this book. But Ted, let's talk about things that are not written, except that's in your bio, etc.
Well, the book UFOs, God's Chariots is published by New Page, which is the publisher for a number of ancient astronaut theorists, which includes Eric von Däniken and some of the others. My book is a little bit different than theirs because I work very hard on trying to put together the science and the culture and the religious dimensions, as well as a chronicle of UFO sightings and reports of abductions and related matters, and try to structure the interpretation. So, at any rate, that's UFOs, God's Chariots, and in the first hour, we were able to carry on conversations about various aspects of science, and in some cases, their religious or theological implications. That's the area that I like to work in. And when it comes to UFOs, I'm particularly interested in the way in which UFOs are interpreted in terms of science and technology. But I've got interests that go beyond that as well.
Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Dan the Man and let him ask his question. Go ahead, Dan.
You are an interesting guest. Mr. Peters, I'm also an ancient astronaut theorist myself, and I happen to have written a book myself. But I'm more interested in what you know, because you're a bit more in the scientific forum than I am, and also because you're dealing with academia too. And anyway, a couple of years ago, and I say a couple of years ago, it might have been even just 1 year, an astronomer, a female astronomer, I can't remember her name, she was looking out into that area where the darkness was found to have a lot of galaxies. Well, we got better at the equipment, and she was able to see something weird, that a galaxy was putting out two different redshifts. And if you know what a redshift is, that's Planck's constant with dealing with the speed of light. That they were using the redshift to actually try to measure the distance that things were going away, and they're using the Big Bang Theory, etc. And this all has to do with that. But there's a problem. We haven't been able to find dark matter, which would be the only way to explain the Einsteinian, apocalyptic universe where it expands and contracts. We haven't been able to find it. Well, the astronomer figured it out. This galaxy was giving off two different redshifts, and one of them is a quasar. She was able to focus in on that, and it was attached by a tether, an umbilical, Mr. Peters, to the galaxy. Apparently, galaxies actually reach a point and give birth to other galaxies.
Oh, my.
Yes. So, in other words, this whole thing falls apart. All the particle physics, etc., that they've spent trillions of dollars on, it's all falling apart. And this is pretty easy to explain. If you know something about plasma physics, and plasma physics says that there are no molecules, there are no particles, and this is easy to prove because they've actually done this test. They've taken one single particle, I hate to use the word, of a perfume, and introduced it to a room of about 50 people, and every single one of those people smelled it. Now, how is that possible with only one molecule? It's because it's plasma. It explains the double slit blind test and everything.
Well, Dan, that sounds startling. I do know that in standard Big Bang theory or model, that there was a plasma period before the emergence of particles, and one of the reasons that it took a period of time before the particles could emerge was that the plasma had to cool. So the plasma that you're talking about, is it Is it hot? And let me just say, I really don't know any facts about what you're talking about, but it's something I'm going to want to learn about, I think.
Apparently, the redshift is only good for measuring heat. It's not a good measure of distance. So when you hear about redshift, this particular galaxy is so and so many light years away because they're measuring a redshift. But that's not true anymore. They've actually found now up to about 24 of these galaxies way out there. In other words, at the beginning, this is what's happening, in relation to a living universe. We have a conscious universe, and really Einstein, said it very, very well with that simple formula: E equals mc squared. If you just replace E with God, you get matter. Matter was created by God dividing itself by the speed of light squared.
Do you happen to know what I gather the person is Dr. Eleanor Arroway from SETI. Do you know was that 11 billion light years away, or how far away was it? Because you're suggesting that that maybe it was there at the beginning, and so are we really looking at the plasma that was early in the Big Bang?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Now I think I've got the picture. So this plasma then is giving birth, so to speak, to atomic particles, and we're looking, if you see it through a telescope, you're looking at it as it was 11 or 12 billion years ago, and we're actually looking at our own past. That's one of the amazing things about astronomy. That is dramatic. So that would tend to confirm the Big Bang standard model, it seems to me.
Exactly, but it's an infinite universe now. It's no longer bound. By the way, you remember in the 80s,
expanding too, and the rate of expansion, I believe, is increasing on top of that. So it's not just growing. Right, it's growing even faster than slowing down, which is what it's supposed to have done.
Creation is still happening.
That boggles my mind. It's true what you're saying, but it just is like, well, how do I get that between my ears?
and it explains so much, And by the way, I wanted to let you know that I know this is going to be really funny about the multiverses.
Yeah,
I've been photographing an apparent Stargate above the area where I live in, and it's in ultraviolet only. But when something goes through it, it mirrors off into the following distance, no matter which way it's going. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
I have a question here. This is something interesting. Dan, feel free to hang by, till the end if you want to ask more questions. But we got.
May I just interrupt and hear about Dan's book? What's it titled, and where can I get it?
You could also get it from the site by going to his name. But go ahead, Dan. Plug it in.
It's America's Electric Nazca, Megalithic Marfa, Texas. I've also found that the Anunnaki may be the only species necessary because they didn't mind playing with their genes. So, but I found proof
well, everybody
that they were
genes, don't they?
It connects everything. If you accept that the Anunnaki are real, it connects everything.
All right.
So I got something interesting here.
Thank you, Dr. J.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, of course. This is John Taylor, Chicago, Illinois. Beyond a cultural analysis, what UFO cases seem to ring true to Mr. Peters?
Well, the question of what is true is a complex one, because I grant and sometimes test to see if a UFO experiencer is telling the truth from his or her point of view. I did interview Charles Hickson, the Hickson in Parker, Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Oh, yes, I love that case.
Yeah, 1972. And I spent a lot of time with Charles Hickson. Calvin Parker.
Let's give people a quick background on this case. They were fishing on the...
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'll let you tell it briefly.
Sure, October 11th, 1972, Hickson and Parker are ship fitters working on the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi, which is near the port. That's why there are a lot of ships there, and I think they were fishing, actually. And this flying saucer descends, your typical 30-foot diameter round craft, and a door opens. They're ushered aboard. In fact, they're even levitated. They don't even walk. And within the craft, Calvin Parker faints. Charles Hickson remains awake, and he's given a physical examination. At least those were his words that he gave to me in terms of an examination of his body, and it looks a little bit like the Betty and Barney Hill case years earlier in that regard. And there is some communication, and I think Charlie said it was telepathic, if I'm not mistaken. And then after 20 minutes or so, the two of them are dumped back on the ground, and they watch the UFO fly away. Well, and I went to the site with Charlie and took some pictures, and he came to at that time I was teaching at Loyola University in New Orleans, and so Charlie came over a couple times so that we could work on the details and things of that nature. Well, in those days, detectives had a second form of lie detection called the PSE, Psychological Stress Evaluator. And
let's not to forget to mention one big thing that the detectives had is they recorded the two of them speaking to each other, which, they were hoping to see if they were making anything up, and yet they were just talking about how stressed they were.
That's right, and you know this case very well. This is good, and if you may recall that that tape was challenged by Philip Klass and some of the other critics, and so I thought, I want to do this again, and so I took a tape of Charlie. And I took it to a detective agency in New Orleans, and I had it tested on the PSE. And the detective who ran the test said there is no question in his mind that Charlie believes the account for the abduction. You can't say objectively it's true, but you can say that Charlie believes it, Charlie's not lying, etc. So this was, to me, really important, and it refuted Philip Klass and the other critics, etc. So I put this at a high level of credibility. But there was one point within that interview in which Charlie registered stress, suggesting that he was lying. And I had asked Charlie to please speculate on a number of items. First of all, Charlie, are you religious, and what do you think about this? And he says, well, Dr. Peters, I'm what you call a hard-shelled Baptist. And after my experience, I believe that God's universe is a whole lot bigger. Anyway, I love Charlie. So that's why I imitate Charlie. Okay, so all that's fine. That passes the PSE without. And then he says, I think I shouldn't imitate them. Anyway, I think that they're going to come back and get me, and I think at some point in the future they're going to take me to where they live in space. That was the point at which the PSC registered a lie. So the detective and I got into a conversation. Why in the world would he lie about this? And, because if everything else he's telling the truth on, why in the world this? The best we could speculate on was maybe he wasn't going to take his wife.
Yeah, that's true.
So, at any rate, I want to say that there are cases like that where you really sort of get into it and you develop a trust for the UFO experiencer. You try to look at it through his or her eyes, and if you judge that you think the person is authentic, well, you just have to give it a certain level of credibility, and I hope that answers this man's question. I put the Hickson-Parker case pretty high on my list.
I definitely agree with that. And one thing that I found different from that case versus other abduction cases is the type of extraterrestrials that they allegedly met on board. Do you recall?
Well, yes, and you can correct me, Dr. J, if I don't get this right, but they had 2 hands and 2 legs.
Yeah, bipedal, yes.
And they're silvery and in color, but Charlie didn't know whether it was them or a suit that they were wearing. But they didn't look like your E.T. that you see in the Spielberg movies. At any rate, what do you recall, Dr. J?
I think that's a good account, and if I'm not mistaken, I could probably look this up as we're talking about this. There was also an extraterrestrial that looked, I don't want to say like Sasquatch, but something of covered with hair. Nonetheless, let's find out. Pascagoula, Mississippi,
1972.
Yeah, UFO case.
Pascagoula.
Pascagoula. Here we go. Calvin Parker, who unfortunately, no, he's still there. It's Hickson who passed away. Okay, let's see the alleged abduction. Let's see if it talks about 30, 40 feet. Doesn't say much about this, about the types of creatures. It says while 3 creatures took them aboard, they were paralyzed, that we know. I'm talking about what are they actually? No, I just see the silver one that you're talking about. Yeah, I recall that.
Yeah.
I recall though that they were all covered in silver, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that they thought they were wearing some sort of outfit, because that's what they said. For some reason, I was under the impression that there was another. One of the creatures was a really hairy one based on one of the drawings, but I can't find that now. So I'm going to turn it over to Johnny real quick, and he's got a question. Go ahead, Johnny.
Well, it's coming from Karen on Facebook, and she's asking Ted, what's Ted's take on the Bible's missing books? Some of Solomon. It says here, in the year 1611, the Holy Bible was translated from Latin to English, and at that time the Bible contained a total of 80 books, and the last 14 books that made up the end of the Old Testament. She's asking, what's Ted's take on that? Do you know about these missing books, and what's your insight, I suppose?
The books are not missing if you know where to look. And if you look in a Bible that's published by the Roman Catholics, you'll find all of those books there. King James of England, who had authorized this particular translation, they followed the Calvinists or the Westminster Confession people who structured the Bible with the Old Testament and the New Testament, And the books I believe this person is talking about are called the intertestamental books. And what was important for the Presbyterian tradition in the Church of England was they wanted the books that they were confident were inspired. And John Calvin and Martin Luther had described these intertestamental books as helpful if they corroborate what you find in the Old Testament and New Testament, but where they deviated, they wouldn't be. So for that reason, King James just had Old Testament and New Testament. So if you look at a Catholic Bible, they're there, and some Lutheran Bibles that are published today, and the National Council of Churches who publishes Bibles, those books are back. And so if you get an old Bible, they're probably missing, but if you get a new one, they're probably there.
I got two small facts to say, and then, of course, a question related to the Bible. The first one is, as you know, of course, when the Romans started appreciating Christianity in the 4th century, I don't know if it was early 300s or mid-late, whatever, Emperor Constantine, I believe was his name at the time, decided to get away with the having many gods, praying to many gods, and to accept and endorse Christianity. So he held a council together where they decided which books to keep and what to remove. I thought that was interesting because then we're not being really, given what was written as far as history, because everybody's got to remember that the Bible was written by men, educated men who can read and write, but they still were men. Now, here's another thing that I said a few times, and I'm going to make it a point again, to alleviate the people who have sextophobia. I'm sure you know about the 666 fake controversy, right?
Oh, yes.
So you know that Apostle John wrote the book Revelations at age 90 in the island of Patmos in Greece. So obviously that it was written on papyrus, and those never survived long. So it was the 7th generation, which dates to the end of the 3rd or early 4th century, maybe even end of 2nd century. It's somewhere in that range. And so they found that part. It's in the British Museum. When it mentions the mark of the beast, it does not give you 3 numbers. It gives you 3 Greek letters. Then it was translated to Latin, when Catholicism was formed, or at that time the Roman Empire, 4th century. Then it was translated to 616 from Greek to Latin. Then King James comes along and translates to English. Somehow the 616 became 666. So for those out there who still have that fear, I remember I had a credit card that was issued to me that had 3 6s in it, and people were scared to take it. I was blown away. They said, "Do you have another card?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Anyhow, now let's talk about the Bible, since we do, we're at the last quarter of our show. And this is something I originally wanted to start with, but we've gone through a lot of topics even addressing this in some way, shape, or form. Now, a lot of people look at the Bible and are told, look at it and read it figuratively. The problem with that is when you read it literally, it makes much more sense. Sure, there's a lot of lessons to be learned, but a lot of the lessons are written literally. So when you're told by skeptics, oh, Ezekiel was just dreaming, or when this account happened, it was, meant to tell a story. Well, what about the best explanation? Occam's razor. Obviously the easiest explanation is probably the best one. Well, the best one would be that these creatures that they're talked about that came from the heavens above, which meant from the sky, are literally exactly what is written in the Bible. Beings that came from the heavens above. So what do you think about that? Figuratively reading the Bible?
I kind of like Occam's razor as you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the concept of being literal is a rather complex one. You can't take things that are literally. For example, when Elijah is taken to heaven and Elisha is watching them, the text says a fiery chariot descended and picked up Elijah and carried him off to heaven. And I had a person one time. I was on the 700 Club taking calls, and this person insisted that fiery chariot had to be a UFO. And I said, I had a moment when I wanted to be a literalist. I said, you know what? The text says it was a fiery chariot. It doesn't say it was a UFO. So could it have been a fiery chariot? And so that word literal there is a curious one. Interpreting the book of Revelation, wow. It's one of my favorite indoor sports, actually. And so just a couple things on 666. By the way, I had a telephone number one time assigned to me.
They had that.
That's 666.
And
I just loved it.
Crazy.
Oh my gosh! Call up Pastor Peters and dial 666. At any rate, both the Greeks and the Romans used letters of the alphabet for their numbers.
That's right.
Today, you and I use Arabic numerals that came from where? Arabia, right? So, any number that's going to appear in the book of Revelation, originally written in Greek, is going to be Greek letters. And the 666 looks a lot to me and to most scholars like the name Nero.
Yeah, and the letters, even though it's ancient Greek, most of the alphabet from the ancient Greek survived to the modern alphabet, would represent, not specifically in this order, SHX.
Yeah, maybe you've got the text in front of you. I don't. I'm just trying to pull it out of my unreliable memory here, just exactly what it looks like. But the literalness won't help you very much, because you can look at that and you say, Nero literally? Or is Nero figuratively the emperor of Rome?
What's interesting, Ted, is
because if Nero lives in the late 60s, John of Patmos is writing 30 years later, during, say, Caligula or somebody like that, where the persecution was just, horrendous. You might say, well, the current emperor is just another Nero. I mean, that's the way you might actually talk. So the 666 is a cipher for either Nero or any Roman emperor who, would be as vicious and cruel. Or maybe even more abstractly, any leader who does that to his people, it could refer to
murdering and torturing. We're talking about
murdering,
pillaging,
torturing,
raping, you name it.
Top on down. We were talking about genocide from dictators earlier in the program, and it certainly could refer to that. And so even today, you might want to use 666 or Nero to refer to a genocidal maniac who might be at work or something to that effect. On the Bible, it's hard for us today to realize that the Bible was really quite fluid until almost the 5th century. We don't really get the Bible until the era of Jerome, which is a century after Constantine. So all these books that we know of as Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and all these are floating around, and they're being read here and there. And there are a lot of other ones that didn't make it into the Bible. The Gospel of Thomas is a good example. Are all floating around. And in 325 AD, when Constantine called the council at Nicaea in what today is Turkey, by the way, Turkey used to be a Christian nation. It's now a Muslim nation, but it used to be Christian. And so that's where the Council of Nicaea met. They gave us the Nicene Creed, but they didn't actually establish the Bible. That was established about a century later, and there was some debate about which book should be included and which shouldn't. But finally, the books that were included are the ones that we have today. And what a lot of people don't know is that those Christians who were actually of three types. There were the Latin-speaking Christians, the Greek-speaking, and the Syriac-speaking. You had mentioned Syria earlier, and one of the things that hurts me the most is to think that that war there may end the whole history of Syriac Christianity, which was the biggest of the three. So the Syriacs, the Greeks, and the Latins were trying to figure out which books should go into the Bible, and they thought lots of books were inspired. Not just the books in the Bible, but other books were inspired too. And so when the Bible, we call it the canon, C-A-N-O-N, it's got nothing to do with guns. When the canon was closed, they didn't say that other books that were not in the Bible were not inspired. I mean, there were other books that the church felt were inspired. They just didn't make it into the Bible, so to speak. So when we get back to that King James question that came up, we didn't need, in the era of King James, to say that only the Old Testament and New Testament are inspired, therefore they're the only things that should go into the Bible, because 1,200 years earlier, Christians felt there were a number of inspired things, and the Bible was only part of the inspired literature, so to speak. That's just history. It doesn't really make too much of a difference here.
But it's true, and that's right. We have to, it always goes back to the two main concepts. Knowledge is power, so of course knowing these things is, good to add to your knowledge. And remember, especially the bad parts of history, we all have to remember it, because if you don't remember history, what's going to happen? We're doomed to repeat it. So, now let me ask you, speaking of recent history, but it seems to have been recurring to a point. And I'm talking now about crash and retrievals, such as Roswell, or our guest last week who's written several books about different states and has uncovered, dozens of crash and retrievals. And then we have a good researcher from the UK, where Johnny is, Timothy Good, who said a very low, conservative, very, very conservative estimate of the amount of crashes and retrievals in the history of man on this planet are well over 100. And I recall reading about one from China about 8,000 BC, 10,000 years ago, the Dropa Stone incident. Then you have Aurora, Texas, 1896, I believe, maybe 97. You have Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 41. You have Battle of Los Angeles, 42, which allegedly netted 2 craft. You have 47, Roswell, 48. What's the other city in New Mexico? And on and on and on. I even read 2008. We had another one right here, Needles, California, and there's a lot of good footage, not of the craft, but of the containment scene. So what is your take on crash and retrievals, and why are we being covered up, secluded from it? Because there's supposed to be crash and retrieval teams from the U.S. based around the world, and I was corrected when I was, told that they're they're supposed to be able to respond to that site and secure it within 15 minutes, as opposed to what I usually thought was an hour. But that makes more sense. So that's something that's continually going on, and it's continually lying to people and really not bringing very much to us. What do you have to say about that?
Well, Dr. J, I'm going to have to study at your feet. I think you know a great deal more about this topic than I do. That Aurora, Texas case is just really dramatic, don't you think? I mean,
yes.
That
they moved.
That
they
really
moved,
blows your mind.
The fact that they moved after ground penetrating radar was available to civilians, they moved the tombstone and possibly even removed the body and the craft. You're right. I mean, it just is mind-boggling to know it's happened so much. But you can never get away. I know it's been played. We've even had people on the show who once believed in it and no longer believe in it, but tomorrow's guest is a top. No, not about that. I'm talking about Roswell. Tomorrow's guest is going to be talking about Roswell.
Oh, good.
But some people don't believe it, even though they believed it at one point. But that one seems to be the most famous, not because everyone, has made it's become a household name. Yes.
I think on the Roswell case, which is one that I've studied more thoroughly than the others, and is that part of the problem there, I think, is that there's a lot of schlock that gives the Roswell case a bad name. You've probably discussed the Philip Corso book.
Yeah.
And I think Corso did more harm than good with the wild things, undocumented things that he said. I think if you go back to what we have in 1947 and just try to, get back to the core, and it really appears that you got something there. And you get both your empirical evidence, you've got your witnesses, and you've got the government cover-up. You've got the whole package there before you get these overlays of things that make the skeptics and the cynics, they just have a field day. My favorite is the Air Force report, U.S. Air Force report that came out in 1997, just a few months before July, the 50th anniversary, and this Air Force report is called, I think it's called Roswell Explained. Mm-hmm. And so
that's right. That's right. They had two, 94 and 97. Yes.
Yeah. And so they're going to explain it, and their explanation is that what they found on the ground in July of 1947 were actually dummies. That were dropped from the sky in order to see what happened. Now, these dummies were dropped in 1954.
That's right. That's why Roswell experts call them time-traveling dummies.
I had a friend who was a Marine at the Pentagon at the time who got me the book, Roswell Explained, before it was officially published. And I said, how can your colleagues at the Pentagon claim this? She says, well, they think that people had such poor memories they could 1947.
And that's exactly what they said. They said, this happened in 1954, but sorry, anybody from 1947. Your memory was a little messed up, so this happened 7 years later. Now, I'm sorry. If something happened when I'm 18 or 25, I'm not going to confuse it when I'm with 32 or 35. It's just, whatever. It doesn't make sense.
Why people get angry at the government,
Of course.
Oh, you guys. And so on the disclosure thing, it seems to me that we have to, A, get a decision from the top down, B, and then not have the president just ask somebody to do them a favor. but actually have a commission that goes in and gets all the files and filters them and packages them, and not like the Air Force in '97 tried to provide some kind of pablum cover-up,
Yes. I'm going to say, actually, one thing, then I have an important question to ask you. Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, has been debated both sides. But what really struck me was that the Honorable Paul Hellyer, the former Defense Minister of Canada, went through his whole life in politics, Parliament, Transportation Minister, then Defense Minister, not believing in this topic at all. And someone gave him a copy of The Day After Roswell and said, read this. Now, he didn't really care about the topic, so he left at his vacation home in Toronto. And he lives in Toronto, and his vacation home is in Ontario. So 2 years later, he's in his vacation cottage, and he's looking for something to read. He can't find what he's looking for, but he finds The Day After Roswell. So he decides to read it. But again, to him, it sounded ludicrous. But in the book were names, generals, colonels, even, enlisted men who now would have been much older at the time when he read this. And he said without violating the people's names, he had called a few of them that were still alive to verify this because the names were listed in there. And what he was told was that everything that he had read in that book is 110% true. That's an exact quote from him. And that blew my mind because I've had people debating it all, since it came out, since 97. We're going on 19, almost 20 years. So that's just one small one thing I wanted to interject because that changed his life. Now, back... since we're literally coming down to the wire, I wanted to go back to religion and extraterrestrials. A lot of people say if this is made public, we're going to have chaos, anarchy. No one's going to believe in the political system, our economic system, and our religious systems will fail. Well, I think it'd be the other way around. Don't you think that the religious systems would actually be affected in a positive way? People would unite their faith even further?
Well, this is an important question, and as you accurately report, there are many people who predict that if we confirm sharing our universe with intelligent neighbors in outer space, that terrestrial religions will collapse, and maybe other things collapse, but definitely the religions. And I thought I would do an empirical study to find out whether this is plausible or not. So I conducted what's called the PETERS ETI Religious Crisis Survey, in which I asked this and a number of related questions to people of different religious traditions within Christianity: Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholic, mainline Protestant, evangelical Protestant, then looking at Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Mormonism, atheism, etc. And the results really show that these people who are worried about a collapse, they're wrong. Almost every Christian tradition, whether fundamentalist on the one hand or liberal on the other, 90+% of the respondents said that their faith, their personal faith now, would not be upset at the confirmation of sharing our universe with extraterrestrial intelligence. The number changes a little bit if you ask people what do they think about their denomination, not themselves but other people. Well, Catholics are a little bit worried that the Pope won't be able to handle it, even though they can handle it. So the numbers change just a little bit there. The Buddhists were interesting. 100% of the Buddhists said that there would be no crisis of any type, if this becomes true. Mormons, 100%. Why? Well, Mormons already believe in extraterrestrial life, and stuff like that. So, without belaboring the point, those people who self-identify as committed religious believers say it ain't going to make a difference. And then in asking for comments, I got from Muslims and various forms of Christians as well as others, this great grand universe made by God is so big that it's got to mean more than what we on this measly little planet Earth can take it to mean, and so therefore I think God must have made other creatures on other planets as well. Got that again and again from the comments. Were there any negatives? Oh yeah, there were negatives, but on a percentage basis. I don't think there's any evidence that we're going to have a crisis. Now, I have to tell you one more thing. I know we're getting near the wire. Is that despite what I think is absolutely persuasive evidence, people still disagree with me. Paul Davies, for example, who's a widely known author on subjects of science and religion. Mm-hmm. He is a firm believer that knowledge of extraterrestrials would create a religious crisis. So I show him my evidence. I say, Paul, take a look at this. And he says, Ted, this is not persuasive because this is only what people say about themselves. You put them in the crisis and it'll really happen. So let me just say the debate goes on, but I think that I do make a contribution to it. I have a little bit about this in my book, UFOs, God's Chariots.
Yes.
But there's also a link on my website if somebody wanted to see the entire survey with all of its data.
Not to mention the other amazing articles you've written. I was gonna ask you that at the end of the show, but go ahead and plug it in now.
Well, my website is tedstimelytake.com, and I have a lot of resources there on the interaction between faith and natural science. But I have other things there too, and the UFO thing. I've got a couple videos about SETI and METI. METI is the new organization that is sending signals to hopefully to targets where there could be civilizations in space, etc. And I've got a number of short essays called Theological Briefs, in which there's a theological interpretation of what's going on in the sciences. So lots of goodies. tedstimelytake.com.
And again, everybody, that is posted online. All you have to do is click on the link under Ted Peters for tonight. Let's go, before we end the show, let's check with Across the Atlantic Pond with Johnny in London. What do you got, Johnny?
Well, Sally in Romford, going back earlier on, mentioned, she says, you mentioned Ezekiel being taken by a UFO was probably a modern interpretation, but she said Nostradamus mentioned New York in his quatrains describing a man-made mountains where the sun was caused to burn twice at 45 degrees. 46 degrees we know was Manhattan City. But my second question was from Simon in Devise in Devon in Facebook. He asked Ted, in the book of Revelations, it clearly mentions literally and describes the two beasts and the Antichrist. What's your take on the Antichrist? And do you see a similarity with the descriptions of the beast and the coat of arms of the Prince of Wales being mentioned in Revelations, having the feet of the bear, the body of a leopard, and the head of a lion? This coat of arms also has the same red dragon that's bound to the feet of the unicorn, having the eye that looks like a man's eye. It's very different as far as the Queen's personal coat of arms, which has a lion-looking puffy and a bigger body, and not like a leopard's body. And again, that comes from Simon in Devise in Devon on Facebook.
Simon, that is a very complicated question, and I've got sort of a simple brain. I'm not going to look for the Antichrist in the symbolism. As I said earlier in the program, I think we can identify Satan and the forces of evil when we hear the call to shed innocent blood, whether it be a voice in our ear, whether it be at a political rally, or wherever it comes from. That's the way to know that Satan is present. And when I think of the Antichrist, I think that's a figure who, in the name of something that is good, tries to persuade us to engage in something that's radically evil in character. And I have not met the Prince of Wales, but I probably, if I do, I'll probably ask him whether he thinks we should shed innocent blood or not. I probably won't be looking at the coat of arms.
Well, do me a favor. When you talk to him, tell him that we send our regards and we'd like to have him on the show as well.
Yes, I think you should.
Yeah. Nonetheless, unfortunately, Ted, we are literally almost out of time. So rather than bombard you with more questions, I'm actually going to give the floor to you and say this to you. You're speaking to an international audience, so remember that people are from around the globe. Different faiths are hearing this, not just in the U.S., and we have believers, non-believers, people on the fence, and a lot of people involved in science, paying attention. So if you had a statement or anything you'd like to say, what would your message be to everybody?
Well, Dr. J and Johnny and Dan, it's been great interacting with you, and I am so happy that you are willing to explore in an open fashion all of these just fascinating and complex questions for which we can only give partial answers, but they keep our curiosity at work. And one of the things that lies below this kind of discussion is the question, what is ultimate reality, finally? And I celebrate the natural scientists constantly because they're trying to figure out what natural reality is, and then we have to keep pressing the question, well, what about God? What about the divine? What about the human condition? Is there going to be any relief in the future from the violence that leads, in some cases, to horrendous consequences, etc.? These are the important questions. Keep asking them and mine and probe any resources you probably can to work on answering those questions. So blessings to you all.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Ted. I must first thank our guest of honor who's been awake and staying for literally to handle a 2-hour show. If I could please tell you to please hang on. Again, everybody check out tedstimelytravels.com, as well as on our website. You could see the link right under his name, and the website is the same name as every social media account, which is the name of the show, Dr. J Radio Live. That is drjradiolive.com. Click on Ted Peters or just look at it and click on his link. You want to hear archives? Go to youtube.com/Dr. J Radio Live, or you go to the website drjradiolive.com and click on the archives or YouTube page. Now, don't forget that is the same name, as I said, for every single social media account, and I'm not kidding. From Skype to Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, YouTube, Google+, Facebook, things I don't even know. They're all Dr. J Radio Live. So if you want to get a hold of us, that's all you really need to remember. Don't forget we have the bookstore too. All you have to do is click on books and videos for all the guests who have appeared on the show, find their name, and it'll take you directly to where you can get their stuff. And remember, the Watcher series, I don't know if you guys know this, but I've been asked to be in Watchers 11, which will be cool because a good chunk of Watchers 10, which has just came out in the last few weeks, was based on a caller calling into the show while the two producers, Richard Shaw and L.A. Marzulli, were on. So make sure you check out that Watcher special where you get like $60 off. You get Watchers 10, another Watchers, a book, a subscription. I know a few of you have purchased it. I think Dan's got it, but whoever has seen the film has said amazing rating so far, and I must endorse it because I think it's really good. So everybody, please do check it out. Now, I also want to make sure I thank our affiliate sites. We have Angel Espino in New York, PSN Radio also taking the show, and let's not forget Ira Robinson, the manager, and Michael Vara, host of Late Night in the Midlands, who are also carrying our show, plus their terrestrial stations, and all the way in the United Kingdom, JC of D Program Radio Network, of course set up by our co-host live in London, Johnny Webb, which leads me now to thank the rest of the team. Of course, Johnny does a lot of work on air and off air. Same thing with Tom, although you haven't heard him. If you've been watching this, not hearing this, but watching this, you've been seeing all the cool slides that Tom spends a lot of time to get ready for the show. So keep that in mind. That is all Tom's doing, and a lot of work behind the scenes to do the website and then some. And of course, we got Lou Sheehan. He's our research expert and does even more than that. You know, he's a good guy, and fortunately he's working, so he wasn't able to call in. But I want to give him his thanks anyway. But the most important people that need to be thanked are you, the audience, the listeners. If it wasn't for you guys and gals, globally, we would not be doing this show. Remember, everybody, disclosure is in your hands. What you do with this information is up to you. But please, whatever way you can contribute, do so. If you're a scholar, read about it, write about it, share it. If you are a, Hollywood sensation, then, take this to your fans. Whatever it is, please, everybody. We're not going to get to where we want to be unless you all participate. With that being said, of course, you see all the sponsors on the site. I just want to say thanks again to everybody from our guests, my crew, and the audience. And with that being said, this is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off.